name is Mildenstein. I've been in the open source community only the last few years, really, but I've been participating in open source for well over a decade and a half. And because of my involvement, I kind of wanted to share some of the things that I have learned that have brought me to where I am and have actually helped me to discover how to repeat this process, as it were, and be able to create a career in open source. Before I get any further, though, I really have to say, if I have learned anything, it's really because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. So many of the people that I have worked with have really made it possible for me to be where I am today. And without them, I really wouldn't be here. And so part of open source is not just standing on the shoulders of those who have come before, but offering your shoulders to those who will come after. So I hit the jackpot. Somehow, I landed a career in an open source job. How did I get so lucky? You know, does luck have anything to do with it? Is it just luck? Well, it does, but not maybe in the way that you would think that luck has to do with it. Now, I like learning how the mind works and about psychology and exceeding my own limits, or the limits I place on myself because of my beliefs and thoughts. And so, really, the story of how to do this depends on learning a little bit about ourselves and how our minds work. And so we're going to talk today a little bit about something called survivorship bias, and about mindsets, and also about luck. And so these things will benefit you in any kind of career or participation that you're involved in, but especially if you want to have an open source career. So luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Now, this is a very old statement, but it really actually sums up kind of what my journey has been. And what I hope today is to be able to share some of how you could perhaps be more prepared. Thomas Jefferson is quoted as having said, "I'm a great believer in luck, and I find that the harder I work, the more of it I have." So you may be wondering, how can I obtain some of this luck for myself? Does it rub off? Is it something I can like stand around lucky people and gain? Well, before we can really talk about that, we need to talk about survivorship bias and mindset. Now, understanding these is about getting a whole picture of success. Without understanding and recognizing failure, how would you know what success looks like? I'm going to let that sink in for a moment. If you don't know what failure looks like, how do you know what success is? Now, in order to achieve success, we must be willing to experience failure. Now, that doesn't guarantee that we will experience failure, but we have to be willing to experience failure. And that's an uncomfortable place to be. Nobody likes to lose. Nobody likes to fail, stumble, trip in front of other people and look foolish. But if we want to grow, we have to be willing to do these things. So what is survivorship bias? The misconception in all of our minds, and this is a common thing that almost all of us do all the time, every day, is believe that if we want to be successful, we should focus on successes that we see in the world around us. But if you only focus on successes, you're not getting the whole picture. You're only getting a portion of it. The real truth is that if you only focus on successes and failure becomes invisible, you're not getting a complete picture. Now, I'm going to tell you an encapsulated version of how I learned about this. And this URL at the bottom, if you go to the Openwest site, you can get my slide deck. You have to go to the joined in link to get the slide deck, but you can get these slides there, and so you can get that link. It's a really amazing article, and I highly recommend it. In it, he tells the story of something that happened during World War II. The United States had what could be termed a Department of War math. They hired the best and brightest minds from around the country to come and solve problems, to write equations to help win the war. And the top brass, every time they had a problem, would come to this department to say, write us an equation to solve this. How do we get our ballistics to work better? How do we determine how to fire different torpedoes by counting the distance between waves on turning ships? All these kinds of things were solved with math. But one day they said, the biggest problem we have is keeping airplanes up in the sky. Our bombers, half of them are not coming back. Every time we sent somebody out, it was a flip of a coin, 50-50, whether you'd come back or not. And so they said, we need to know how to armor our bombers in order to survive. Well, the problem is that they were making a guess about how to do this. You see, they had they had these bombers that came back, and they were shot up along the wings and the fuselage and under the belly and tail gunners, and they said, this is where we think we should put the armor. And this mathematician stopped them cold and said, that is the worst place you could put the armor because of survivorship bias. And he didn't use those words, but that's what it is. And the problem is that those were the survivors. Those are the ones, that was the places on the plane that could get shot up, and the plane would still make it home. But because they mistakenly misunderstood that this is where they're getting shot up and therefore we should put the armor there, they nearly made a mistake that could have been even more catastrophic. And so what survivorship bias really means is that the things that we perceive as survivors become representative of the whole group instead of just themselves. We need to learn to recognize failure and not just success in order to have a complete picture of things. Survivorship bias is what pulls us towards best-selling diet gurus, celebrity CEOs, and superstar athletes. You look to the successful for clues about how you can live your life better, about how you can succeed as well, because you believe that if you do what they do, you'll have the success that they have. And the problem is that that's just not completely true. Some people may be able to repeat that, but will everybody? What about the people who tried the same things, did the exact same things, and failed? We don't see them because they're outside of the survivors. They're the failures, and they're invisible. Now, you may be looking at this and thinking, so why should I listen to you? You've been successful. You're there in a career in open source. Well, the reason is because I'm going to be talking about my failures as well, not just my successes. I'm going to try to give you a complete picture of what my experience has been so that you can understand. Now, I suffer from survivorship bias just like almost everyone else in the universe, and continue to do so despite my best efforts to overcome it. But the more that you become aware of it and look at it, the more you can stop and think through these things and be able to overcome them. And so, is there a pattern I can follow that will help me to succeed? Is there a way that I can measure this and overcome it? From the same article is this quote: if you group successes together and look for what makes them similar, the only real answer will be luck. There's a ray of sunshine. So why are we even here? Why are we trying to learn a way that we could repeat these things? Does that mean that there's no pattern to follow? So it might be disheartening, the fact that successful people probably owe more to luck than anything. But if you see luck as a sort of magic, then that's part of the problem. Now, the latest psychological research indicates that luck is a mislabeled phenomenon. Luck is the measurable output of a group of predictable behaviors. Randomness, chance, and the noisy chaos of reality may be mostly impossible to predict, but luck is something else. So, if it's something else, then we do have a chance to be able to replicate it. So, when you see the word luck today, or I use that word, think of the word instead as meaning the pattern for success, or growth, maybe. Unlucky will be the opposite. Patterns that will not necessarily lead to success or are almost sure to hinder your progress. So, a psychologist named Richard Wiseman speculated that what we call luck is this pattern of behaviors that coincide with the style of understanding and interacting with events and people that we encounter throughout life. So what differentiates lucky and unlucky people? Unlucky people are narrowly focused. They're looking for a very specific outcome in everything that they go into. They don't leave themselves open to something random to come out. They are fighting to just get one kind of outcome. They also crave security. Being as part of something that's unknown, that's really uncomfortable for them. And so they try to stay in their own safety little bubble. They're anxious. And instead of willingly approaching things, not knowing what the outcome will be, they will fixate on trying to control those things and seek a specific outcome and goal. So if you've ever heard of Carol Dweck, she's a psychologist as well. She was at Columbia, I believe she's at Stanford now. She created a program called Brainology, and these are actually textbook principles of what she calls a fixed mindset. Now, people in a fixed mindset believe that they received at birth all the smarts and gifts that they're ever going to have. And so if they can't use those to solve a problem, the problem must not be able to be solved. And they trap themselves in a little box. And so they will avoid challenges. They will give up easy in the face of obstacles. They won't try hard. They kind of stop themselves because it's hard. And the scary thing is that these a fixed mindset is what happens when you praise a child for their outcomes rather than their effort. Now, all that talk about what's the word I'm looking for? Self-esteem, boosting kids' self-esteem in the 80s when I was going to school, it kind of primed all of us to have this fixed mindset. We were being praised for what our outcomes were, or no outcome at all, rather than putting in good effort. And so I grew up with a fixed mindset. I was this unlucky man that was in this place of negativity and non-growth. So that's actually where I come from. This is all stuff that I have learned in the last few years that has transformed the way that I interact with people and with my career. I was anxious. I would avoid new situations, and it was hard, but I tell you, it can be overcome. I am living proof that it can, as a matter of fact. So what do lucky people look like? What are these people that are following this pattern for success? Well, they're constantly changing their routines and seeking out new experiences. They put themselves in situations where anything could happen, good or bad, more often, and they are therefore exposed to random chance. And what happens is that they try more things and they fail more often. But when they fail, they shrug it off and just try something else. They keep moving. They don't give up. Anybody ever seen that Disney movie, Meet the Robinsons? Keep moving forward. You failed and it was awesome. It's a textbook example of this kind of mindset, a growth mindset of not giving up when you hit a failure. A growth mindset leads to a desire to embrace challenges and to persist in the face of obstacles. And I'm going to come back to some of these principles here in the course of what we're talking about. They see effort as the path to mastery, not some kind of talent that they were blessed with and they don't have to try. They learn from and accept criticism and suggestions for improvement from others and find lessons and inspiration in the success of others. And the more I have applied these things in my life, the faster and the more I have grown, both individually and in my career. Thomas Edison was famous for saying, "I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work." And this is a textbook example of what a growth mindset is, or for following that pattern for success. Unlucky people miss chance opportunities because they're too focused on looking for something else. They go to parties intent on finding their perfect partner, so they miss opportunities to meet great new friends. They look through newspapers determined to find types of job advertisements and as a result miss other types of jobs. Lucky people are more relaxed and open and therefore see what is there rather than what they're looking for. Now, could it be that the difference between success and not succeeding is as simple as this? Missing opportunities because I'm seeking a specific outcome and expecting it to come only via a specific path. Do you see how unlucky people are actually holding themselves back from growing and moving in different ways because they are looking for a specific outcome? Now, if they would change to a growth mindset to follow this pattern for success, they could enjoy the fruits of success. And having lived on both sides of that coin, I can tell you my life is much better on the relaxed and open side. So, how do I do that now? Now is the question of how do we do this? So now that we've learned about this pattern of success and growth mindsets and how pursuing it can change your life, how do you go about doing this? We're going to take a brief walk through my work history, actually, and how events in my life were either lucky or not. I'm not going to hide that and paint a portrayal of I succeeded because I did these things. Well, sometimes I didn't. The truth is that much of my work history, I was completely ignorant of all of this. This is something that I've actually only read about after kind of blindly stumbling through this by accident and by trial and error and forcing myself to kind of move forward even not knowing this. It is my hope that knowing these things will actually help people to move forward without having to beat their head against a wall like I did for the better part of a decade before I learned about this. And so, the idea is to try to develop a growth mindset and move forward. Now, the first thing you need to understand about me is that I'm a college dropout. And that is almost exclusively because I had a fixed mindset. Now, I tell people that I dropped out of college because I couldn't afford it, and that is to an extent true, but it's really because I lost my Pell Grants because I was on academic probation. I failed. And it's really because college was hard. And I was not in a mindset prepared to accept that challenge and to fight and grow with it. I wasn't. And so, seeking what was comfortable and familiar, I just went to work. I started fixing computers. I did things that interested me that I wanted to pursue, but were not as hard necessarily as the college life was. And so you wouldn't be able to truly understand how these things changed my life without understanding that this is where I started. I started from zero and from a place of failure. And so the first advice that I will give to you about how to change your life is to seek out new experiences. And specifically, if you're looking for this in open source, it is to participate in community involvement and to grow your skill set. Now, these things look really generic on the surface. You know, anybody could tell you this. So let's take a little bit deeper look at how these applied to me and to many others I have met and see how they can be applied by somebody else. So when I talk about community, I'm going to talk about the part of luck that includes interacting with events and people that you will encounter, including changing your routines, placing yourself in situations where anything could happen, and being exposed to random chance. Skills, they're the part of luck that demonstrate that you have had experiences, that you have done things, and that you've learned and can continue learning. Now, it's kind of interesting to notice, if you look at this, that the community side is bigger than the skill side. This is key, and we're going to see exactly why that is key, especially as it applies to me. Now, the second thing that you need to understand about me is that I'm really introverted and I have Asperger's syndrome. And if you're familiar with that, I mean, a lot of people in the tech community have Asperger's. That's not necessarily a new thing, but for a lot of people with Asperger's, community is a terrifying concept. We have a really hard time with new people and new experiences, and we like to stay in our comfortable little bubble. And so being a part of a community is a terrifying thing for an Aspie, but it transformed my life, working to overcome that obstacle. And so I'm super passionate also about talking about things that I like, and I can talk the ears off of people, and so I alienate them at the same time. And so it's really hard to be in a place where I work well inside a community. So what is the first element of community that we should work to develop? Ourselves. Can't underestimate the power of changing and developing yourself. Teachers can teach you things, but only you can be the student and learn it. Be aggressively involved in learning new things. Ask questions and immerse yourselves in the technology that you want to understand, and don't be afraid of making mistakes. Again, failures and mistakes are how we learn, just like the Meet the Robinsons thing there. From mistakes you learn, but from success, not so much. You learn from mistakes. So what were the first skills I developed? Well, in the beginning, there was a penguin. Now, how many of you's first taste of open source was Linux? It's going to be a lot of you, I would guess, and so it was for me. Now, I had experimented with Caldera, Red Hat, SUSE, and SUSE was the first one that I actually really liked. I started with 6.2, and I tried to dual boot. I had this really cool 2-processor Pentium 2 300 server board with onboard SCSI and cool things, and I thought this was the bomb. But I could only use both processors if I ran either NT 4.0 or Linux. And it was about the 1500th blue screen of death when I finally, in my wrath, swore, and my wife still laughs about this, that I'm going to make it work in Linux or I will do without. And I sat there, and for 3 months, I immersed myself in learning how to recompile the kernel and how to install packages and build things. And I just soaked myself in Linux for 3 solid months. And that was how I got started. It actually led me to my first kind of open source job. I worked for Novell testing as a software tester, but I was doing some limited NFS integration with NetWare. So I'm doing a little bit of open source there with that. But my community involvement at this point, when you're learning for a resource, you go to search engine, you say, how can I learn more about this? And I found out that there was a local Linux users group, the Provo Linux users group, Plug. Any of you guys members of Plug? 1, 2? Awesome. Plug is amazing, and it was because of the Provo Linux users group that I got my first real sysadmin job. A member of Plug put out an email to the list members and said, hey, we're looking for junior admins. Anybody interested? And I reached out, I interviewed for the job, and I got the job. Community is what landed me my first job. Not my skills, not anything else, but community. I didn't even understand. But here, that first job is where I learned more about Linux. I learned about Solaris. I learned about racking servers and server management. It was awesome. So your first part of community, besides yourself, is going to be user groups and meetups. Participate in the community. The more you participate, the more people you'll get to know. And again, we talked about how interacting with events and people is part of that luck that you want to develop. So you'll increase your chances for success the more people that you rub shoulders with. Because it's not what you know, but who you know that counts. And of course, that's not completely true. It's a mix of both. But in many cases, just like the first one I mentioned, jobs can be found through community. And so, any of you participate in IRC in any way, shape, or form? I highly recommend it, as funny as that sounds. IRC is dated. It is ancient technology. We still use it to this very day. Elasticsearch, Logstash, Kibana, all of them have their very own IRC channels. So many open source projects have an IRC channel where the developers themselves will hang out and you can come to them with questions. Well, I wasn't hanging out in any open source community, but I was hanging out with friends in IRC because they ran a private IRC server, and we had a lot of fun. But it was because of a friend that I had in IRC that I got my next job. I was working for an insurance company in Salt Lake, and the atmosphere was extremely corporate. And they were still using Telnet instead of SSH, and my eyes were like this big. And this was in the year 2000 still. And SSH, knowing how scary Telnet was, it was just like, I'm barely starting, and I know that anybody on the network can see what these passwords and stuff are going across, but they were using it. Well, and I brought it up, and they said, well, we're all firewalled off. I'm still like, but what about the other people in the workplace that might, and we tried to get them to do this, and they wouldn't do it because there was no corporate sponsored or commercial offering for SSH at the time. When we said it was open SSH, they were like, we can't do that. There's no commercial support. I was like, I couldn't handle it. I started to have a nervous breakdown over this whole thing. But I did learn a lot about HPukes and True64 and SunOS and Solaris. They had a lot of old legacy systems there. But it was, it just blew my mind. And so IRC is our next community there that I'm going to mention. And so it's geeky, it's ancient, but it still works, and it fosters participation in community. So file this one under try more things and fail more often. The corporate lifestyle and the not turn on a dime kind of environment was not for me, I discovered. So even though my friend was working there and I loved working with him, I really didn't like the commute because I was going all the way from Provo to Salt Lake every day. And it was during the construction that they were doing on the highway before the 2002 Winter Games. And so it was really hideous. I was learning some, but I was miserable. And because of my fixed mindset, I wanted something that was more comfortable. And I was going to stick with it until I found that. And this is kind of where the next community begins to come into play. So my next big open source thing was FreeBSD. I discovered FreeBSD by accident because I wanted to build Linux from scratch. And I started looking at all the other Linux distros to say, all right, what do these guys do? If I'm going to build my own, what's it going to have in there? What does it do? And I said, I should look at FreeBSD and see what they do to see if there's anything good worth incorporating there. And I fell in love because everything was from source. Now, back in those days, package management with RPMs and deb files was a disaster. Dependency hell, to be blunt. I mean, I would have so many conflicts that I just couldn't make things run, and I hated that. I wanted something that I could build from source and know where everything was coming from. And here I discovered that FreeBSD already did that out of the box. And so I learned FreeBSD, and I became involved with the FreeBSD community at that point. But it was here that I learned, it was through my FreeBSD involvement that I got my next job. A friend of mine had a birthday party, and his uncle came to the birthday party, and his uncle was a developer at this other company, and it just so happened that they were using FreeBSD, a virtualized FreeBSD kernel, to power their virtualized hosting engine. And so he said, hey, you should interview. I wanted an out. Here was an out, and I got to work with FreeBSD. Where was the lose for me? And I dove at the chance, and I didn't have to commute all the way to Salt Lake. It was actually just across town, and so this was a wonderful thing. So you can see that I've gone through 4 jobs now, and I really haven't changed my skill set any. Community is what really powered my job change, and I didn't recognize it yet. I just kind of thought, oh, how lucky of me. I did not see that community was really powering my job improvements. So, try more things, fail more often. Find a niche that speaks to you. Now, niches are a really cool thing. And now that I understand how this works, that growth mindset, if you hit a setback, you're not going to let anything get in your way of trying to solve that. You will tackle that. The same way that I tackled, I'm going to figure out how to make it work in Linux, or I'm going to do without it. It's those niches that make you drive to want to move forward, that you want to latch onto in your life, because they are going to have the power to force you into that growth mindset. No matter how uncomfortable something else is, your desire to overcome those obstacles will make you learn. That is part of a growth mindset, and that is something you really want to have. And a niche that really motivates you is going to be the important thing for you. Now, the scary thing for me is that I have to admit I did not have a growth mindset at this point. I was at this web hosting company for 7 years, and I did not hardly grow at all. I was too comfortable just doing the same old thing day after day, learning by little bits and pieces. Instead of feasting, I was snacking. I wasn't doing anything that could really move me forward, and I started to stagnate, and I really didn't like that. But it was towards the end that I tried to force myself out of that mold and do something, and I found a project internally where we were collecting the syslog messages from all of the servers into a centralized location. Because, hey, now we can generate reports, we can look for things. And I discovered this piece of freeware, I don't think it was open sourced, but it might have been, that somebody created called SEC, Simple Event Correlator. It's a Perl script. I see a nod over there, somebody knows what SEC is. And suddenly, I could capture the stream as it went through there and catch correlating events and generate alerts. And I could generate reports, and I could do all kinds of cool things with this. And I was excited again about something at work, not just, showing up and knowing how to answer questions. We could catch DOS attacks, brute force SSH attacks by correlating events in a time stream in a window, and we could do really cool things with it. But again, as I mentioned, I was miserable. If you're not the worst musician in your band, you should switch bands immediately. Now, jazz musicians say this not because they want to be they want to be part of the best person of a band, but because they want to grow. If you're not the worst person on the team, you're not in a position to grow. You're in a position of, what do I have to do? I'm here, I'm making money, I don't have to change. If you want to grow, you need to be put in a place where you have to work. Put yourself in a place where you have to work, and you will work. And so this is a way to force yourselves into a growth mindset. Even if you're not comfortable with a growth mindset, this will put you there. And so it was towards the end of these 7 years, again, I was stagnating, and so I enlisted the help of a recruiter, and I got a job interview in Austin, Texas. And it was a leap from my skill set. I was a little worried about whether they would take me or not, and that's because fear of change, fear of not being good enough, the things that are hallmarks of a fixed mindset. Is my talent good enough to cover this? I didn't know. But I interviewed with all the members of the team, and there was 10 members on that team, and they all decided to take a chance on me, knowing that I wasn't a Java application admin, but that was what the job description was. And so the thing that sold them was SEC, my work with centralized logging. They thought that was really cool, and that was something that they wanted to work on. And so they said, hey, you can learn the rest of the skills because you've demonstrated an ability to learn. We're willing to take a chance on you and teach you. And so I moved with my whole family to Texas, and we were there for the last 7 years. I only stayed with that job for 5, though. So recruiters are part of your community. They're your friends. Wait, this one needs its own slide. Always be polite to recruiters, always. You may or may not have experienced aggressive recruitment before, but if you keep down this path, chances are you will. Treat them like they're your aunt, even if you get a bad vibe from them. I make it my habit when LinkedIn happens to not click on the not interested button, but to actually reply courteously saying, thank you for reaching out to me, but at this time I'm satisfied with where I am. But I want them to not feel like I'm just being abrasive, because being polite matters. Always be polite to recruiters. So remember this slide, we're back. This is important because again, I talked about why it's important to have that motivation to put you in that growth mindset. So, anybody use ZABBIX before? Got a few ZABBIX users? Love ZABBIX. It was the thing that really jump-started my open source career. Now, while I was at that job in Texas, our monitoring infrastructure was too hard to maintain. We had hundreds of nodes of different things going on, and we were trying to monitor it all with Nagios, and our monitoring server was an old Solaris box, and it was dirt slow. We would sometimes get, sorry about that, that was unexpected. We would get recovery notices before we would get the alert. And it was because the box was overloaded. Too many alerts were coming in, and it just couldn't handle it. The single-threaded speed of this old Sun box was not fast enough to keep up with stuff. And so we said, let's have a little contest, friendly contest inside, and figure out what we can do to change things. So, long story short, I found ZABBIX online, deployed it, started generating graphs and things for people, because that's built in, and the team started using it before we had even officially decided to adopt it. And we still had the meeting, but it was kind of a formality. They're like, yeah, let's go with this. And everybody loved it. And this was the niche that I carved out for myself for the next several years. And everything, somebody would come to me and say, hey, we need to monitor this. Is there a way? No, there's no way to do that. But I couldn't let it go. I would find a way to script a way to extract those things and get them into ZABBIX. And suddenly we were able to monitor things that we were never monitoring before. We had visibility into problems we didn't have, and I loved it. I loved it to death. And so I started sharing the things that I was learning in the ZABBIX forums. And I started sharing the source code I was writing online, whether it was just sending a zip file to somebody or something else. But my behavior started to change at this point, because I was getting out of my fixed mindset, and I was allowing myself to start to think differently. And so sharing things in forums and email lists is a huge part of the community, and so can blogging be if you've got a good discussion engine going with that. But again, participation in the ZABBIX forums also coincided with my discovery of GitHub. Suddenly there was an easier way to share code online, and people could browse through it and see it. It was amazing. Yeah, there was CVS and SVN, but this was so much easier to share and to actually distribute my code and get feedback on it. This was the most amazing thing ever. And GitHub can be a huge shot in the arm for your luck, because it kind of puts you in a place where anything could happen. People could use your code in ways you never anticipated, and so suddenly you have to think about it differently, and it gives you an opportunity to grow. It changes the game. And this is one of the reasons why publishing your code is important. Now, no matter how bad you think your code may be, publishing it is very important. It is a deliberate act that can enhance your luck for all of the previously mentioned reasons. These help you grow as a coder, they grow your community involvement, and that's how you get over that growth mindset, get into that growth mindset and change your luck. In the academic world, it's publish or perish. If you don't publish your academic research, you stop getting funded, you end up working for somebody else, and you don't get to do the new discovery things that you want to do. Publish or perish is maybe a little bit too negative. I'd rather like get, push, and flourish. Coders and sysadmins are not typically academics in the same way. They may not even have formal degrees. I'm one of them. Published source code is kind of like an artist portfolio, though. And so what you do with this is kind of what really begins to make you visible to other people, and that they have even a history of being able to see how you've grown because of the history of Git commits that you've made. Now, having a history of published code can be even better than a long and storied resume, because resumes are dead and code published is alive. Now, remember, we talked about how there's lucky and unlucky people before with these things. Well, resumes are also narrowly focused. They only show controlled situations. They can't show how you respond to random situations. They really don't show how good you are at having that growth mindset. Resumes are dead in the sense that they can't really show what a vibrant and active person you are in your community. There's an ebook online called Resumes Are Dead. and that's why I chose that word specifically, by Richie Norton. It's on Amazon.com and it is free. I recommend it. I haven't even read the entire book. I learned so much in the first 20 pages. That was all I really needed. This put me in a growth mindset without using that word. This put me in a place to increase my luck without understanding survivorship bias. This was a turning point for me in beginning to understand how my behaviors would affect my career, and that I had a choice, and that those choices could shape my destiny. This book is also kind of a precursor to another book that he wrote called The Power of Starting Something Stupid. I haven't completely read that book either. I've only gotten through about half of it, and then I had to pack up and move, and I haven't even unpacked the book yet. But it's often, it's kind of directed at entrepreneurial things, but aren't we all entrepreneurs of our own code? I learned a ton from both of these books, simply because it got me into a growth mindset and stopped thinking of myself as being comfortable and staying in a comfortable place. Now, do these examples sound like luck, or the pattern of success, or a growth mindset to you? Those are exactly the kind of things that I did. I participated in the community and helped others learn ZABBIX or solve their problems. I created programs at work that solved problems for other people. I wrote scripts and other things to monitor things that other people ended up using. What is your stupid thing that you're going to start? That's up to you. But this is a great way to begin getting out of a fixed mindset and into a growth mindset. Because a stupid decision that works out well becomes a brilliant decision in hindsight. Again, this is about seeking out new experiences and trying things more often and failing more often. So, starting something stupid is inherently lucky. Now, here are some examples of people who started something stupid and they failed lots, but they also succeeded lots. We tend to look at them as examples of success. Anybody recognize this guy? He was a college dropout too. He started a company making computers out of his garage, his parents' garage, no less. Anybody know what happened to him 10 years later? He got kicked out of his own company that he had started. Now, how's that for crazy? But what did he do? He rolled with it. He started the company Next. He bought Pixar. He kept on going. He kept on trying other things. Now, did Next succeed? No, but it did. OS 10 right here on my machine is based on Next. It still kind of succeeded, and the things that he learned there still carried with him to future things, even though the company itself ended up getting acquired and was just intellectual property. Steve Jobs is an example of somebody who had a growth mindset and never stopped. I'm sure everybody recognizes that name, even if not the face. He was a college student when he started the Linux kernel. Anybody know what percentage of his code is in the Linux kernel today? 2%. 2%. He started something stupid, but look at what it turned into. He just thought it was kind of a fun project, and look at where it has grown to. It's absolutely amazing. Now, he also had some failures, you know. He worked for Transmeta. Anybody even heard of Transmeta anymore? Some people, older people in the industry will recognize that. It kind of went nowhere, but he worked there. He kept on going. Now, I'm going to show you some examples that matter a lot in my life. Shai Bannon. Anybody recognize that name? He wanted to improve an open source search engine called Compass that he had been writing because it wouldn't scale. Elasticsearch was the result. That's where I work now, is Elastic. Jordan Cecil, he wanted to be a better sysadmin, so he wrote tools to help him do that. One of those tools, some of you may have learned about yesterday. I don't know if any of you attended the talk on FPM. Jordan wrote FPM, but the one that I am directly tied to is Logstash, a way to unify your log files by mutating them. They all come in with different timestamps and different formats. Why don't we find something that can mutate those timestamps so that they'll all be able to correlate and be able to be viewed in the same thing? Rashid Khan, he liked Logstash but couldn't stand the interface that Jordan had bundled. So he set out to write his own to improve that. He wrote Kibana, which is our visualization engine. So what do those three have to do with me? Logstash. So in 2011, I was vacationing here in Utah from my job in Texas, and we had been trying to do centralized logging, and it just wasn't working. We tried to inject it into an Oracle database, if you can believe that, and that was a nightmare. We failed miserably. So I'm going through an email list, and I see this word Logstash. I'd never seen it before, and I went, ooh, hey guys, we got to look at this. This might be what we're looking for. And I send it back to my friends. And I had to keep my inbox pruned because I had like a 250 megabyte limit. If I didn't keep it empty, I would have been dropping stuff. And so I sent it back and said, hey guys, you should look at this while I'm gone. We'll talk about it when I get back. I got back and nobody touched it. And so I immediately started deploying this. And within 2 weeks, I had people interested in what was going on. They weren't as interested in me because this is this niche thing for me. But we were starting to catch SLA level events. Even by accident, when I was showing it to somebody else, we see this all of a sudden, this wall, this jump in log traffic, and we zoom in, reducing the search terms until we found out exactly what was generating that, and we went, that's bad. And somebody had pushed in a change that hadn't done it correctly, and we had to go back through it. It prevented us from having an SLA level output problem. Logstash is what happened there. And as a result of my involvement with Logstash, I had deployed what may be the first commercial or enterprise deployment of the Elk stack before there was even a company. Because I had met Jordan in the Logstash channel on IRC. I met Rashid there. I got help from Shai.
You guys have a booth?
Yes, we do. We have a booth. Come talk to us later if you want to know more. I met all those guys in IRC. When they formed a company, 6 months later, they hired Rashid to build a front end for them. 7 months after that, they hired Jordan. I went immediately into IRC and said, hey man, congratulations, that's amazing. When are you going to get me a job? I was joking. He wasn't. He said, you're actually one of the people I wanted to talk to because of your successes. And because I've interacted with you in the community, I knew that you've been helping people, that you'll be able to immediately jump in and support other people that are trying to do this, that all these things will happen. My job came through community and I didn't even know it. I had no idea that it would do that. And so, this is kind of our summary here of what my skills were over that time period and how that happened there. Now, I created a product during this time period as well. And so this is kind of, I'm running out of time, so I don't want to keep you guys too long, but I wrote this as a simple, like not even 50-line Python script to be able to prune indexes, because I learned that if you have too many active indexes in Elasticsearch, you can run out of memory and it blows up, and that's not a good thing. So we wanted to keep only 15 to 30 days worth of things. And so I wrote a script to do that. And I shared it with the community as a tar.gz file on a Jira page. I didn't even publish it on GitHub. I just put it up there. And suddenly, somebody else used it and immediately tore it apart and said, oh, blah, 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 and gave me all these other ideas. I could have reacted really negatively to somebody totally upending my source code at this point, but I went, you know what? That is a better way. Thanks for showing me a better way of doing this. And so we put that up there. We renamed it immediately, and suddenly people were able to delete things, indexes. Longer story short, over time, this has evolved and been rewritten 2 times. It's still Python-based. It is now an official product under the Elasticsearch umbrella, and it's continuing to be developed now. I am the kind of the sole person that does this, but I get help and feedback from the community, new problems, issues. It's on GitHub if you want to go and look it up sometime. So what now? In the description of this talk, I said that my story and the stories of others had similarities. The first one is you've got to change your mind. You've got to overcome that survivorship bias and practice the skills of success that help you to become lucky and develop a growth mindset. That growth mindset and the pattern of success are important. Remember, you don't want to be in that unlucky category. You want to be the lucky person because you are putting yourself in a place where things can happen and you're going to accept them, whatever they are, and roll with it. So what are some of the ways that you can do this? First and foremost, help others. Participate in communities and help others, whether you're doing it online in the IRC forums, email lists, other things like that. And I mention this specifically because there are 2 people that are active in the Logstash community that we would hire today if they would let us. One of them, Jordan refers to as the triage fairy because he's in France and Jordan's on the West Coast. So he goes to bed at night, and when he wakes up in the morning, all of the new GitHub issues have been triaged by this guy in France. He's not hired by us. He just does it. He's involved in the community, and he participates, and he helps. And we've reached out to him. I think we may eventually get to hire him, but he's still where he's at for another few months. We love that guy because of his involvement in the community. There's another guy who just lurks in our email groups and on our forum, and he just helps answer people's questions all the time. And we've approached him, but he's like, no, I'm happy where I am. Okay, love what you're doing, man. Keep doing it. You get noticed when you do those things, and that is one of the best ways to be a part of a community and to grow and to be recognized. You can also go to conventions like this and meet people and interact and go participate in user groups and meetups. Participation is important, but also asking questions. The mere act of approaching somebody that's written a piece of software and saying, hey, I had this happen, is that expected? Or is this a bug? What should I do? Can give somebody else the opportunity to grow because they had a bug and they've experienced something. But it also helps you to grow as well by introducing you to new people and new opportunities and new chances. Whenever somebody even brings up an issue or a question in Curator that ends up becoming a part of it, I add them to my contributors list because I want them to feel like they have participated in something. Above all, do not be arrogant or condescending when interacting with other people, either telling them your code sucks or how could you ask such a stupid question. Don't be that way. It's the fastest way to turn somebody off of community and put them in a fixed mindset. And yourself too. That's not putting you in a place to grow and to experience new things. And last of all, create something, build something. Fight the fear that might well up inside you that maybe it won't be good enough. Maybe somebody won't like it. Fight that fear. The fear of failure, the fear of judgment of others. Those are the things that kept me in my fixed mindset the longest. Was being afraid, was being terrified that it wouldn't be good enough, that somebody would look at me and see imposter syndrome, see he's really not that good, he's hiding behind this and he looks good but he's not really all that good. Don't worry about that. Fight that fear and just go out and start, because what's the worst thing that could happen? If it turns out that you're duplicating somebody else's efforts, you find out, but you learned how to code something new. You learned how to do something that you didn't know before, and that's growth. That's what's important. Remember, 10,000 ways not to do something, like Thomas Edison had there. And that is how luck is built. And then after you've created something, share it with others. Share it on GitHub. Share it on some code repository where other people can experience it and do other things. Now, this is my last slide here. And I like this photo because it represents to me everything I have gained by changing myself. This is the Logstash team as it was back in December. We've got a couple more members of the team and a couple have moved into other teams. But this is one of the first teams that I've ever been on where everyone was striving to have a growth mindset and be community-minded, especially with regards to open source. This is my team. If you adopt some of the changes that you have learned about today, it is my hope that you can find or create a team like this. Thank you.